Now, who wants their balls crushed?
Me?
I know I certainly don't, but I do want to talk about the best episode of the season so far. From seeing Final Destination on ice to a Transformer 2 reference, it's time to break down this episode. Spoilers ahead. We open with Homelander looking at the Starlight supporters in attendance, and you can just see the look on his face, and you just know he's getting closer and closer to his breaking point, but he holds it in for now, at least at this Vault conference. As Homelander says to his supporters, warning them for what the other side wants.
They want to get rid of superheroes. They want to get rid of me. And then they want to replace you with some godless, non-binary socialist.
As he introduces the current members of the Seven, and he also introduces the two new members, Firecracker and Sister Stage. As he lets everyone know that there's an opening spot for Ryan potentially, who he brings on stage and forces him to smile. Meanwhile, Butcher gets his plan in place with the help of Joe, who gives him something strong enough to put Ryan asleep and take him under their control to stop Homelander. As the newest member of the Seven, Firecracker isn't waiting to make her presence felt as she talks to the media and shares her thoughts about what's being given to the Starlighters.
Did you know that these quote-unquote vaccines that they're giving out at the Starlight House actually cause autism?
As crazy as she may sound, Sage reassures Homelander that including Firecracker will only benefit his main goals. Seriously, the back and forth with Sage and Homelander is the best dynamic of the season so far, as they talk about her super suit, which she initially refused to wear, to him talking about the popularity being a power. Let's just make a bet in the comments right now. Who's going to be the first one to turn on the other and go rogue? Is it Sage or is it Homelander? Let me know in the comments below. Now, focusing on the side plots of this week's episode, we have Annie is officially back as Starlight as she watches her #1 fan, Firecracker, give a hate speech against her, which we can see is getting under her skin, which we finally learn why she hates her so much a little bit later on in this episode. Now, we have Frenchie trying to talk to Colin early on in this episode, but that's interrupted by a Firecracker supporter who's under the impression that there's kids in the basement who needed to be saved, as we see Frenchie takes care of him with ease. But on a serious note, the show is crazy and ridiculous, has some really crazy moments, but it is unfortunately true that there are people out there like this gentleman who drink the Kool-Aid and actually buy into the propaganda that they feed on. Now, Frenchie does get that alone time that he wanted with Colin, but instead of telling him the truth, he digs himself a deeper hole by making out with him. Meanwhile, Kimiko takes the wrong advice from her therapist and tells Frenchie her plans to face her past by finding and killing her enemies from her past, as she convinces him to tag along by putting the safety of the kids over her vengeance. Later in this episode, they do find that location, but Frenchie is under the influence, and as she's killing these men, he's tripping out and seeing the craziest and most random things as this is happening. Now, during this fight, Frenchie has a daydream of Colin, who's spending time with his dead family, which we see some pretty dark stuff as we see all the victims he's killed over the years. Man, I didn't realize how dark and how bad his past was, but again, like I've said before, the theme of these characters facing their past has been a central part so far, and it's been done pretty well. After killing most of the men, Kimiko comes across this woman who knows her but immediately starts fighting her until Frenchie steps in and makes her run away. Now, my question is, who is this mystery woman? One would assume that it might be someone that's related to Kimiko, and it might be even her sister. Now, last but not least with the side plots, we have MM telling the boys that he wants A-Train to join them by turning him into an informant. Now, tying that all into the main plot, we have Victoria getting a front seat to what some of her president's new administration will include, which is banning of the Supes having any participation in the military, policing, and all other government positions, as he views the Supes as
Supes are entertainers, period. End of story.
And we see Victoria smiles and pretends to be on board. Yeah, what I said back in episode 2 of her having to kill the president seems to be more likely and happening sooner rather than later, but after what we learn in this episode, she won't have to do any of the heavy lifting. Now, back at Homelander's penthouse, we see Ryan plays the game Tournament of Heroes as Ryan gets a request from her friend, and it's Butcher. First off, the fact that they created a video game to frame this scene as a way to move the story forward was so clever to me, and honestly, I would pay to play this game. As we see, Butcher is planting the seeds for him and Ryan to meet up later in this episode. As we see the frustration and ticking time bomb of Homelander is ramping up as he's watching Starlight at a press conference and mentions the power or lack of power that Homelander and Vought have, and you see her mentioning that is just itching away at him. Now we see Firecracker lets Homelander know that she is willing to do anything to please him, and he knows exactly what she meant. You see the new Black Noir is in the need of answers and direction from Ashley on what his role is on his team, but the running joke of being told to shut up hasn't gotten old for me. But speaking of old, Homelander tells Ashley that she's no longer to be a part of these meetings for the Seven, and that Sage is basically the new CEO. And it was just so funny as she's taking the walk of shame and dropping her things and is told that she's now the company mascot, aka Ronald McDonald of Vought. It had me dying laughing. Now Sage fills the Seven in on the video coverage proving that the Starlight supporters were innocent, as Deep is no longer in charge of the crime analytics, and he hides this from his octopus lover later in this episode. We have Butcher mixing the drugs that Joe gave him into cookies and claims them as Rebecca's famous recipe, as Ryan has arrived and Butcher tries to convince him to stay. Now I'm not gonna lie, obviously having context of what Butcher's trying to do, but it doesn't make it less creepy. Now he does convince Ryan to stay by inviting him to play a game of foosball. Now during this game, they both open up to each other as Butcher mentions his deceased brother, and we see Ryan opens up about the accident that just recently happened. Now Butcher tells Ryan that he's a bad man and he doesn't know the first thing about looking after a kid. Now ultimately Butcher does the right thing and he goes against what he would have done back in season 1 by drugging Ryan, but we see that he throws the cookies away. Now A-Train is under the belief that he's going to make up with his brother as he gets a message from him, only to find out that it was MM. Now this is exactly what I was talking about a couple episodes ago when I said that I want to see MM taking charge, because he's just great at really framing the situation and setting up A-Train and playing to his guilt, and MM's just got away with words and he's just great with talking to people. Now A-Train doesn't make the turn quite yet because he's not ready to die after Sage found that footage, so playing the hero can get him killed, but MM reminds him that,
"But you're still standing here."
Now back at Vought, they interview someone that they believe was involved with the footage and someone that's connected to Annie, and just as this young lady is talking about what the conversation entailed with Annie, Homelander lasers her right in the head, killing her. Now as messed up as that was, and it was messed up, but from a story perspective, at least A-Train won't be a suspect anymore, as we see Ashley gets rid of her letter saying that she was going to quit Vought. Now Annie confronts Firecracker by sneaking into her room, and she asks her why does she hate her so much. As we find out that these two characters actually had a past together, they used to be in the same pageant circuit back when Firecracker went under the name Sparkler. Firecracker has held this grudge against Annie for years after Annie told everyone that she slept with the judges, and Annie also told her,
I don't talk to fat sluts,
which forced her to quit. Now this doesn't change anything in my perspective as far as Firecracker being a POS, but from a story point, I like her character's motives of being embarrassed when she was a little kid has fueled her into making the Seven. Now back with the boys, Hughie and MM are the only ones in attendance for this very secret meeting between Homelander and Victoria, as MM was told about this from A-Train. But as this is going on, we get a glimpse of the boys on ice, which was just hilarious. We see Hughie is caught between a rock and a hard place as he's forced to stay in the vents as his meeting is taking place. Now Sage tells Victoria what I said back in episode 1 of the killing of the president Singer, as they will do the heavy lifting, and if she becomes the president, all she has to do in return is
expand the Bureau of Superhuman Affairs, condemn the defund the soups movement, remove all books and teachers that teach critical soup theory, a hero in every town with legal authority over the police.
Now Homelander, or should I say Magneto, really lays it on Vic about being afraid to come out as a soup. Now I 100% had to suspend my disbelief in this scene because I thought it was ridiculous, as we see Hughie's sweat lands on Homelander's shoulder and him not being able to get caught while he was moving in those vents, which clearly showed that it was very hard to not move and not be heard before Homelander's lasers hit him was a stretch for me. But I will forgive it after what happens next. As we watch Hughie trying to run away from a very pissed off Homelander, we see MM gets a hold of the switchboard controlling the lights, which affects Homelander's lasers, as we see him slicing one of the skaters in half in a scene that is straight out of Final Destination happens next. But my favorite part of this scene, and maybe one of my favorite moments of this season so far, we see Homelander closes in on Hughie, but he's too late because A-Train has saved Hughie. Now what I love about this scene, I know a lot of you all remember this, we gotta appreciate this moment right now between these two characters, because you think about episode 1, and one of the first scenes of The Boys is when we saw A-Train killing Hughie's girlfriend, and for that to be full circle was just such a great moment. Now this doesn't change much from Hughie, but to me this is a great start for A-Train trying to apologize by saving his life. Now we end this episode with Frenchie sharing a childhood story as he says,
"Man is condemned to be free because once thrown into this world, He's responsible for everything he does.
Now we watch Frenchie refuses to tell Kimiko what's bothering him, and in return she refuses to tell him who the identity of that girl was in the warehouse, which again, I'm assuming is some type of relative. We see Hughie going to check on his dad, and he has a heart-to-heart moment with his mother, and he just simply asks her, why did she leave all those years ago? As she tells him,
But it never went away.
But you were always so fun. We'd have dance parties.
I never wanted you to see it.
as she hid her depression all those years, and she tells him that one night she actually tried to take her own life, which she was unsuccessful in doing, but ultimately she decided to leave. Now, she tells Hughie that she tried to call him over the years, but his dad would stop any connection between the two because he didn't want any confusion, which I can understand, and she just eventually decided that it would be best to move on and not cause any more damage. Now, Joe is clearly upset with Butcher's decision not to drug Ryan, as he reminds him that time isn't on their side. Now, Joe gives Butcher two options. Either they get Ryan and train him to kill his own father, Homelander, or they find a way in killing Ryan. As our final moments show Sage and Deep bonding over Outback Steakhouse and Transformers 2, and one thing leads to another as we watch the smartest person in the world hooking up with maybe the dumbest. Now help me out in the comments below, but I have no idea what this bloody item is and what it means to either one of these characters. Maybe it's a device or an item that helps her really get in tune with her intelligent part of her brain, but again, I have no clue. As we see Ryan returns home to a pissed off dad, as Homelander just wants to know why he isn't enough. As he loses his cool and Ryan runs upstairs, we get the return of Mirror Mirror on the Wall, which is John versus Homelanders, as he says to himself,
It's time to overcome this need for love, this sickness, once and for all. You're never gonna be your true self until you transcend your humanity. What do? You need to go back to the start.
As they tell him it's time to go home. Now, it wasn't that long ago when I said that I hope that episodes 2 and 3 were much better than episode 1. Well, damn, these last 2 episodes were excellent, and this was my favorite out of the 3. I honestly have no complaints about where the story's going so far, especially the way it was framed in this episode, and I just love how almost every main character has had a moment like Homelander in which they have to face their past and come out either on the side of where they're reborn and they're new and they want to do the right thing, or become the worst version of themselves. While episode 1 was my least favorite, I love that 2 and 3 really shaped this 3-arc structure, which I'm just hoping that this story sticks to landing, because if they go the route that they're going so far, this may be the best season of The Boys so far. So make sure to leave all your thoughts on these first 3 episodes so far. Which episode was your favorite? And also make sure to share your thoughts and your theories and your deeper meanings for what you all hope to see in the weeks ahead. I really appreciate you all watching today's video. Now, if you watched all 3 of my breakdowns of this new season of The Boys so far, put in the comments right now, #HoneyBoy2. Again, make sure to check out my breakdowns of the last 2 episodes, and also check out my playlist of all of my videos of The Boys. You all are awesome, be safe, and I'll catch you all on the next video.
Yeah.